Well, hello and welcome to a special off week edition of CraftQuest on Call. I'm Ryan Ireland. I'm your host, the creator of CraftQuest, where we typically stream live the first and third Thursday of every month. And I usually do that with my friend and co host, Andrew Welch. Hi, Andrew. How are you doing?
Good, Ryan. How you doing?
Doing good. Well, Andrew, I got you here on an off week because we have a special guest, and we're going to talk about a new tool that came out as part of the Craft 5.5 release this week. So we thought we'd have the source, the Oracle himself, here on the live stream to talk about Craft 5.5 and the WP import tool. So I'll say hello to Brandon Kelly. Hey, Brandon.
Hello.
Well, thanks for joining us. Um, so, well, there's been a new tool released this week called WP Import. But before we get to that, because that is the topic of the live stream, I want to touch at least briefly on the broader release of new features and stuff with Craft 5.5. What was the general idea or like motivation with 5.5? I see it as a content authoring release, but how about what from your side, Brandon? What do you think?
The main goal was to get the nested entry workflow improved. Uh, so that was kind of the initial, like, that's the one thing we need to get in.
Hmm.
And that's just been very clearly not designed as people would expect. So it's kind of this like one uh, critical issue that Craft 5 needs to solve before I can feel more at peace with how that whole release has gone. Obviously, there's always more work to do, but that one in particular felt like we needed to get that in before we really start shifting focuses on Craft 6. So that was the main goal, and then from there, there's always just a bunch of things that are in development. Some things get done in time for the release, some things get pushed off to the next one. So in this case, one of the big other things that happened to line up was that whole card UI attribute customizer, which was pretty cool. And kind of once you have two of those things in there, like, okay, now we've got this authoring experience theme going on. So if there's any other low hanging fruit we can get in that fits in with that theme, then that's kind of what we'll look at.
Do you usually plan the But one second. Do you usually plan like the point 0.5 release or something like that as like a milestone release or not really? I feel like I like maybe 4.5 felt like a bigger release. Or maybe it's just the progression of working through, the major version of Craft
Mhm.
that leads to that.
Yeah, I want to say it was 4.5. Maybe that was the one where we kind of redid how assets work. We also did like a 3.10 or something at the same time.
Mhm.
3.5, I remember being a big one because that was the new field layout designer, I believe. Yeah,
That's
no,
right.
it's just how it works out. Like we've been cutting Craft 3.x releases every month and a half to 2 months ever since 5.0 came out, and so this just fell in line with that.
Nice. Uh, so the authoring experience improvements are really cool. When I was going through them, I think I messaged you and I said like, I think this is going to be a really cool release. It just feels like just some really nice improvements. But there were some
Yeah,
things that I didn't expect, like some new field types. There's the range field, and then I guess it's not a new field type, but the checkboxes and radio buttons with customizable options, right? Where you could just on the
yeah,
fly.
and that's one of those things, especially for checkboxes, where maybe it's not a new field type, but it does enable you to start using checkboxes when otherwise you would have been stuck just using like relationships or something
Right.
like that. There's a lot of people that have created sections to manage checkbox options effectively, like, and it's very overkill for the need, but it's the only way you could get custom stuff in there. So that's what they do.
Yeah.
So yeah, theoretically, we'll see more usage of the checkboxes field type or the radio buttons field now. And with range, that was requested maybe a couple weeks before I started working on that, and it was already kind of top of mind. And then uh, going through the WP import stuff and trying to map up advanced custom fields to craft stuff, um, figured, okay, well, they have a range field. It'd be a lot nicer to give people the same UI they're used to there. It's an easy win, um, versus just normalizing it to a number field, which also would have worked, but not as elegant.
Right. If anyone that's watching live, if you're in the chat, I know that Andrew, you're monitoring the chat. So feel free to chime in the chat if you have a question for Brandon or for anyone else. And
And there
if
is a question
oh,
relevant to what he just mentioned.
go ahead.
So John Wells is asking about the checkbox radio box improvements, and he's saying if in one entry, if someone adds an option to it, is that
Mhm.
option then available in all of the other entries, or is it only in that one entry?
No, and that's an area where we differ from advanced custom fields, which does have a setting on the checkboxes field type where custom options would just become part of the field config and available to every other entry. We don't have the ability to do that because field settings are locked in the project config, and you're editing in a different environment where config changes aren't allowed. So that wouldn't really make sense for us. I mean, if we really, really wanted to do it, I guess we could come up with a new database table for storing that stuff and uh, make it happen, but it'd be a little hacky and seems kind of overkill.
All right. Thank you, John. A question from David is: WordPress has a theme system. Is there a plan to ever add such functionality to Craft? This has always been like the first thing that someone says when someone's like asking about Craft coming from WordPress is, well, it's not like a
Come on,
themed setup, but is that
come on,
something that's
guys,
coming?
Yeah.
let him do the demo first. Come on.
No, I mean, yeah, it's worth getting it out there, I guess. No, there's no theming planned for Craft, where like WordPress's implementation, where themes would be like this self-updating thing that, you kind of just use as like part of the dependencies of your project. And the reason for that is just it's just a fundamentally different market. We are really targeting agencies that are building bespoke websites with Craft, and we are putting all of our focus on building great developer experience around custom templating, GraphQL API, doing everything we can to like make Craft this really great content management system that leaves the front end up to you and let you build up rather than modify. Um, Adding a theming layer would just be a huge distraction from that, I think, and really put Craft in a position where it's competing with people we don't want to compete with. We don't want to be competing with Webflow and Wix and Squarespace and whatnot. If you just want point and click and no code and all that, like you're probably going to be much better off with one of them than WordPress or Craft, no matter what we do on the theming space. That said, we are starting to release more involved starter projects. So we kicked that off yesterday with the WordPress starter. That's visually based on another starter project we're working on that's basically just kind of a generic blog with commenting and whatnot, that is going to be available in a variety of front ends. So there'll be Twig, and I think we're launching with Twig and Nuxt, and we'll probably have that out as early as next week. But then Next and 11T and just all sorts of a variety of different front end options with that. And so the goal there is like have the default installation be something you can kind of look at and understand how things connect and understand like how to establish a very basic content model with Craft, and learn by modifying, just with the understanding that like what you're working with in the front end is your code. It's not something that's going to get updated over time by anyone besides you.
In the
And
example
touching
of
on the WordPress themes specifically,
Mm-hmm.
I mercifully have not used WordPress in some time, so I may be out of date on this. But
Mm-hmm.
aren't themes just a PHP file that could do anything that you want in WordPress? So, like, how would you even import that?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, technically, if we really wanted to do it, we'd probably have it be something that plugins are providing. And there would be some sort of specific content model requirement that Craft would have to have that theme could then like assume is there. Um, and I don't know, it would be just such a fundamentally different product though at that point.
And chat can tell me if I'm out of date on this, and I very well might be, but I do have vivid memories of editing the theme in WordPress and a variety of different themes, and they were all just PHP that output HTML, and they had all sorts of logic in them, and I don't even know how you import that. It doesn't even make sense.
I don't know if you could. It's a bit more modern now. There are definitely starter projects. I don't know if there are themes or not that are based on Timber, which is the Twig implementation in WordPress. And there's definitely, you're working in the different Twig files for your components, so it's a little bit more straightforward. Which it would be similar to probably how we structure something in Craft with Twig components.
Timber, by the way, shout out, made by Upstatement, which is
that's right. Yeah, Timber
from
made
the
by
agency of ours.
Yep. Okay, so with 5.5, and last week Andrew and I did a live stream, and it's up on the site, and you can check that out for features. I also below it there's a write up with some of the features, and then I want to call out for everybody to kind of, if they want to orient themselves with the Craft CMS Pixel and Tonic plans for migrating to WordPress, then definitely check out the announcement post from Pixel and Tonic, as well as you have a knowledge base article, right?
Yeah, that's linked to further down on the page, like the last paragraph.
New starter project. There it is.
There you
All
go.
right. This is really helpful. I was reading through this morning as I was setting up a import for a project to test it out. But really great. Just want to call out a couple things which might be helpful also if you're maybe bringing someone onto a team where they have a lot of WordPress experience but not a lot of Craft. This actually might be a helpful way of helping them orient themselves, because down below you have this vocabulary table, which I thought was a nice way of tying the loose ends for how people think about things. So kudos to whoever wrote that, Travis, August, whoever wrote that.
August, yeah.
Okay, August, awesome.
Yeah.
Super cool. So check out those. I'll drop some links in the chat, and they'll be with the recording of this as well. All right, Brandon, so we talked about the range field and the custom options on checkboxes and radio buttons. And those, I mean, I know you added those because they're beneficial to Craft developers, but they're also beneficial to migrating from WordPress. Those are advanced custom fields, right? So you needed to have parity there, right? You had to have something to represent that on the Craft side. Is that why those were created?
Yeah, otherwise we just wouldn't be able to support those field types, because if you've got a checkboxes field that's in WordPress that is allowing custom options, I don't know what we would do. I guess like use a table field or something, and just like you'd completely lose the whole checkboxes concept if we didn't have the ability to do custom options in Craft.
Yeah.
So that's what made those kind of urgent priorities. But then they also just looking at it, it's like, yeah, this is actually a great idea. This, it totally makes sense that Craft would have this. Just make it configurable, just like what Advanced Custom Fields did. So we're not like injecting this new feature into every single checkboxes field out there, but it's a nice little quality of life improvement for developers.
It's just a light switch field, right, to toggle that on and off for that field. Yeah.
Yep.
So how did this all come about? Like we can't ignore sort of like some of the turmoil in the WordPress world, but you were kind enough to give me access to the repository, and I was testing it. But it definitely seems like something that started not that long ago. Maybe it was a little bit of a passion project on your part to kind of get this done.
It literally started as I was watching your guys' stream on importing content to Craft from WordPress, and just realizing there was such a huge opportunity here to make
Yeah.
something that's better and more focused.
You called it
And it's
tedious in your thing, which is, I think, correct. But yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, especially like, if you look into the Gutenberg stuff, um, it's that's a huge challenge to do in a generic way because if you look at like how Gutenberg sorts its content, it's HTML
Hmm.
with like HTML comments that contain all this like specific like JSON metadata on how to like instantiate this block component. But then there's also like rendered HTML that the block is supposed to output kind of on the front end. Kind of similar to like what you get in the end result of like rendering a CK editor field in Craft with a bunch of partial templates powering the nested entries and stuff. But it's if you just focus on that rendered HTML, it's a lossy import, right? Like let's say you have an image block with that Gutenberg is fully aware is pulling in like this media object ID 1000. But then its rendered result is just an image tag with a URL pointing to some actual image URL.
Hmm.
But as far as the import would be concerned, if you're doing this with like a typical feed me based import, is it would just look like, oh, it's an image tag and it's pointing to this URL, and so we'll like fine, we'll recreate that exact same image tag in our WYSIWYG field, and you lose that asset relationship.
Hmm.
And so, and there's a million other examples like that where like every one of these Gutenberg block types has, different meta config info that is relevant and should persist through the import, but like there's no way to do that without a dedicated tool.
Yeah.
So
Well, I
that
didn't
was
I
kind of
didn't
the main
realize that our
solution.
live stream was the inspiration for this,
Yeah.
which is pretty funny. You did Sherlock my course, but I think as I was telling Andrew, like WP import is the better way, right?
Yeah.
It's the better way to go, which it makes sense. How familiar were you with the internals of like WordPress, Gutenberg, ACF before you got into this project?
Not at all. I installed WordPress for the first time that day. So, I mean,
So
I
to
was
get this,
familiar with like how Gutenberg stored its content. I knew it was going to be a shit show, but beyond that, I had no clue.
Yeah.
to
So
get this right,
thankfully,
Brian, you're suffering by trying to show how to do the import, then inspired Brandon's suffering where he had
Suffering,
to learn
yes.
about. So this
But you
is
know
yeah,
what? But
okay.
everybody is better off though because of all
yeah,
of that. So two sufferings equals a not suffering, I think is what we're
sure,
saying.
yeah. It's we suffered in solidarity, I guess. Yeah. The oh shit, I totally forget what I was going to get with that. Never mind. Keep going.
Oh, it's all good. So someone asked in the chat, Mort said, would WP import be able to handle any WordPress site? And Mort says this one's a doozy. Like I guess we can talk about like is there like a range of sites that this will support? Is it
Mhm.
um
Yeah.
I assume
So I mean, right now it's probably pretty limited. I had one sample WordPress site that I've been working with that had a pretty wide range of Gutenberg block usage, but very little advanced custom field usage. So I've gone through and just added a bunch of stuff to test different custom field scenarios and stuff like that. But I'm sure that we are overlooking a wide variety of things, and so this is it's obviously day one here. Um, if anyone has a WordPress site they want to import and it seems like it'd be a good candidate for WP import, if you're able to share that site with us, that's like the best case scenario. But alternatively, you can run WP import. You could even run it as like a dry run, if you pass -- dry -run, um, and it'll go through the whole thing either way. At the end, it'll export a like error summary file that documents every single Gutenberg block type and ACF field type that we did not have a native mapping for yet. And if you have that and send it to us, it actually we actually log like what the data looked like for that object, whether it was a Gutenberg block or a advanced custom field. We output like the settings for the field or the block type's full metadata, and that gives us pretty much all we need to know to take a stab at like building that functionality back into the plugin. There's entire categories of things to be imported that we just don't even try yet. So we haven't looked at Yoast yet. We haven't looked at Gravity Forms. We haven't looked at what was the other one? Drawing a blank, but you know, WooCommerce. So like these are things that theoretically we could add support for down the road if we had sample sites to work with.
Okay. Well, before we get too much into maybe what the future would look like for W import, let's you're prepared to show a demo to show everybody what this looks like.
Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll pull up your desktop here. And
Okay.
there you are. All right. We see WordPress.
Okay. Yeah. So this is the WordPress site I've been testing with. Here's a Gutenberg editor that has a variety of different block types. We've got paragraphs, pull quote, ordered or unordered list, heading, an image that I guess has broken. Oh, because I've changed the ngrok URL. Oh well, it used to be an image. And then we go down here, and we've got a variety of custom fields. We've got select and date and WYSIWYG and just all kinds of stuff. Here's my little range field, Google Maps field, OEmbed, just all sorts of things. Very Playa inspired UI here for this relationship field. For those of you that come from Expression Engine, icon field, just all sorts of stuff. So this is kind of what I've been testing with. And if we go over here, I've got a pretty much fresh Craft 5 install. The only things that are done to it are I've got a couple plugins installed. So I have CK Editor, I have Verb Comments, and I have Google Maps by Double Secret HC. That's it. And we go into settings. We've got 0 sections, 0 entry types, and 0 custom fields. So pretty stock besides just those 3 plugins being installed. So that's that. And the goal would be that we can recreate this over here. So open up my terminal. Here we go. So I've got, this is just kind of an awkward thing with DDEV, but this site is being run through ngrok because that's the only way I could get the two to talk to each other. So I've got ngrok running in this tab, and in this tab I've got nothing, but I'm at the root of this site here.
Cool. Can you make your text bigger on the terminal window?
Oh, I sure can.
Thank you. Excellent.
Let's see. Okay. So if I run ddev craft WP import, how's the text size there?
Perfect.
A little bigger?
That's good.
Good? Okay. So all I have to do is run that. And it's going to ask me what my WordPress site URL is. I've got a little snippet for that. So I just do x.ngrok. There it is. And then it's going to ask for an administrator username. So I've got one in there called Brandon. And then it's going to ask for an application password. This is something you have to set up in your user settings in WordPress.
And this is in the documentation for WP import of how to do all of that.
Sure is. And I do not know why I'm getting... Let me try this again. I might have typed the password incorrectly. There we go. So it's going to grab kind of high-level information now from the site. including all the different content types, which includes any custom taxonomies you've created, custom post types, media content, all the different things that we support. And it's going to give you kind of this content summary here, including how many items it's finding for each one of these things. It's going to take 10, 15 minutes if I were to do all of this right now, and I don't think we want to sit around and watch that. So I'm going to actually get out of this and try it one more time. I'm sorry. I'm going to try it one more time, but I'm going to specify type equals, and I'm going to do timeline, which was the post type for that entry we were looking at. And that has only 67 entries, so it's not going to take very long. So I'll go ahead and do that again. And this time it'll give me a much shorter content summary. And I'm going to go ahead and say yes. And so now it's going to go through and it's going to start pulling in all that different content. It's going to be creating sections, custom fields, an asset volume, just all the different things. And it kind of just creates things on the fly as they're needed for the import. So you won't end up with this massive content schema with 1,000 field types just because that was what the support was. If you only have like 2 custom fields, then that's all you're going to get. And so that's done. Even though we did specify one single content type, that content type had relationships to other sections and whatnot. So we are expecting to see more than just one section here. So now if I go into sections, you can see there's 4 now. We've got interviews, pages, posts, and timelines. Timelines is specifically the one we were interested in. And we've also got several entry types. A few of these are actually just used by CK Editor rather than the sections themselves. Go over to entries and timelines, and here we go. This is the entry that I just imported, or the entry I was focused on. And
Nice.
you can kind of see we've got the CK Editor field that has, again, that paragraph, block quote, paragraph, list. I guess there was a horizontal rule in there too I missed. Heading, and then somehow the image import actually did work in this situation, even though WordPress couldn't display it. But it worked and maintained, the correct relationship with it and all that kind of stuff. And then we also, so the way Advanced Custom Fields works is you define like field groups, and then those field groups will get a condition that determines which types of posts and whatnot they should be displayed on. And so in this case, we have a field group called for timeline, and we've got another one called for timeline x2, just for fun. And so the import will basically map those field groups to custom field, or to field layout tabs. So we have for timeline here, and that has all the different stuff that we were just looking at, including our brand new range field. It's also got, and this is another thing, the whole link label and opens a new tab thing. Obviously something we've been like kind of waffling on, but made sense to add it at this point because Advanced Custom Fields does include those same metadata info, and we wanted something to map it to. This is kind of crazy, but we even map the custom icon field. So here we had like this little home icon selected. We have this map that I created. It's got like 400 icon mappings that map these things over to our font awesome counterparts. So for the vast majority of those icons you might have selected, those will carry over.
Who got that job?
Oh, that was me.
Who had to set up the 400 mappings?
That was me. There's no way I would be able to retain whatever employee I assigned that to, so I had to do it. Google Maps works because I happened to have smart Google Maps installed. And then we've got Matrix here for this repeater content down here, wherever that was. No, it's behind this accordion heading right there. So yeah, everything just kind of gets pulled in. We one kind of weird choice I had to make was one of the Gutenberg block types is for creating like a cover photo for the top of a blog, and this is kind of comes down to like this weird difference in approaches between WordPress trying to be, this kind of generic page builder thing with Gutenberg, and Craft being a structured content CMS. If you were structuring your content and you had like advanced custom fields built into the system, there's no way you would have chosen like to define the cover photo and the heading for the page as a block inside this long form content blob, right? So if we come across a cover photo block, we will extract that data and then just move it into dedicated custom fields in this cover photo tab. Then we also have meta tab here, which just includes some basic things that every post has or might have in WordPress. Just have a place to put it. So whether the entry is sticky, so it should show up at the top of the list on the front end. And then template is just, like a way of defining, I guess, a theme template. And we don't have anything to do with this data, but figured it's better to not lose it in the import. So there it is. That's pretty much it. If we look at this CK editor entry, we've got basically 2 separate nested entry types available to us right now. Group is, and then there would have been more potentially, but these are the 2 that we actually came across during the import. So these are the ones that got created. Group is basically like maps to a group block type in Gutenberg, but it's just a way of defining nested content, but with a custom background color and text color. So there are a couple entries in here that take advantage of that. And then this page content here is just an identical CK editor field to this one here. I'm sorry, post content. So theoretically, you could go recursive with this if you wanted to. But yeah, that's it.
Very
That's
cool.
very cool. So I do have a couple of questions that have come up from people, if I can shoot them your way.
Sure.
Well, this one is just pure rumor mongering, but is it true or false that you had no gray hairs before you started on doing the W import stuff? Is that true or false?
That is very much false. I've had gray hairs since I started getting into Expression Engine, probably.
All right, but serious question. Someone asked me, knowing that we're going to do this stream, but they're not asking it live, is what about support for menus? That's kind of a big thing in WordPress. Does it do anything with importing menus and mega menus and that type of thing?
Not currently. That's another one of those things that if someone gives us a sample WordPress site that's taking advantage of that and it makes sense to include that in the import, then we could definitely add it, no problem.
Makes sense. And if you're doing, let's say you do an import and something's not quite right or whatever, what's the recommended kind of undo redo? Is it just do a database dump beforehand and then do a restore and then do it again, or?
Yeah, you could do that. Or you could start by doing a dry run, and if the whole thing completes without any errors, then you'd feel confident to try it again without the dry run flag. When you use dry run, it's going through all the same things, but everything happens within a transaction, and we just revert the transaction at the end, or we don't commit it, we roll it back. So effectively no changes.
And that'll catch errors, but if someone wanted to look at what came in, they would probably have to do the database dump and then restore and then do it again, right?
Yeah, and in that case, if you wanted to like actually see the results and then revert back, you just need to use a database dump. The other thing that's worth mentioning is you can do this in phases. There's like a per page option, and there's a page option, so you can customize, like, if all the results coming back from WordPress are paginated, then you could choose to only do the first 100 and then the second 100 and so on and so forth. You could also just re-import everything, and by default it will only pull in the new content. So it'll every time it comes across a WordPress item, it'll compare that to, it'll see if we already have the same entry with the same WordPress ID documented there. If so, it'll just skip it. So you can do that to do fill in the gaps. Like, let's say you start this project and then you keep filling in more WordPress content for the next month or so while you're building the craft site. You could run the import one more time at the end just to pull in whatever's changed or whatever's new.
Is that the default? or is
Yeah, the
that something?
default is to only pull in things that are new.
Okay.
And then there is an update option you can pass that would ignore that and just update everything. Even if there's, if it finds the existing entry, it would update all of its content based
One of
on the
the
latest WordPress.
one of the things
Well,
that
that's
we
really
did.
cool. So clients could continue to work on their WordPress site and add content, and you could have converted it over and done some more work on the craft site, and then you can just sync it up. That's really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if they have, like, let's say, mostly been adding new content, but then they did at some point go back and edit an existing entry, you could run the update flag and specify the item ID you want to be re-imported. So you could just do that one single thing over again without pulling in everything.
And Ryan, we got a couple questions from chat. Did you want to get to those, or did you want to make your comment?
My comment real quick, because we kind of skipped over it when Brandon was doing the demo, but if you go through the instructions for setting up WP import, it's clear how Craft is accessing WordPress and getting the data. But just to be clear, it's using the WP JSON API to
The
get
REST
everything.
API, yeah.
Yeah, the REST
Mhm.
API. So it's not querying the database or anything like that. It's all through the REST API, which is on by default in all WordPress installations. I think you have to turn it
And
off.
it's not only on. My impression is you have to install a plugin to disable it,
Oh,
or maybe write some
of course
PHP
you
code.
do.
But
Okay.
yeah, it's not like a built-in setting.
Yeah. Okay.
And
Which is
August,
fine because the default output you get is pretty safe and tame. It's just identical to the output you would get from on the front end of a WordPress site. The reason we have to ask for your administrator username and an application password up front is because that's the only way we can pass like a query string parameter saying the context here is that we're editing the content, so it gives us more data back.
Okay.
And then we also
Yep.
have a plugin. Part of the setup is you actually have to install a plugin that we wrote on your WordPress site that just like kind of augments the API and adds some more data that we didn't have access to yet.
And I've seen that with some people that have sites that they don't even have access to. Like someone built a WordPress site for someone 4 years ago and they don't have any of that information. I've seen people go in and get all the content out just via that default API that's enabled by
Yeah.
default. And they had no other way to get at the database and any of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, if you did that, you would end up losing data because again, you wouldn't have access to like all the Gutenberg settings for each of your blocks, and you wouldn't have access to the advanced custom field type settings and all that kind of stuff. So there would be some data loss in that process. But if you had access to the database, even if you lost your username and whatnot, WordPress's CLIs do have the ability to like add a new user account and all that kind of stuff. So there's ways to get back in as long as you have access to the database.
Andrew, let's do some
We
questions.
Yeah. So Nicholas Batari, any plans for a Gutenberg block to matrix block conversion strategy? Maybe an opinionated approach.
So that's close to what you already get with CK Editor. It feels like what people are generally using Gutenberg for is long form content. That's what it was built for. And CK Editor and Craft's ecosystem is built for that as well. So it seems like the right choice is to just map Gutenberg to CK Editor and take advantage of the fact that CK Editor and Craft 5 lets you create nested entries, and so it's not just storing HTML; it's actually storing tons of content, nested content as well.
And then Mort is asking, will there be a way to customize the import down the road? Exempla gratia, define a WP plain text field meant to hold a URL that you'd prefer to migrate to a URL field in Craft. I guess what he's asking is, instead of just creating all new fields, like define what field to map things to.
Mm-hmm. Well, so the best way to do that right now would just be to let the import do its thing, and then change the field type afterwards. So at the end of the end result here is a Craft site that you have complete control over. So like, I don't know if you're still seeing my screen, but
I can bring it up.
I can go into settings and then fields, and here's all my different fields. And if there's anything that's a plain text, nope, text. Oh, yeah. There's nothing stopping me from going here and changing this now to link if I want to.
Right.
And as long as I'm sure that it's only containing URLs, that should be a safe transformation.
Brandon, you touched on the idea of like iteratively migrating content over, so you can pass in for like the specific content type that you want to migrate, which seems like a good idea in terms of like making sure it works, going and verifying in your craft installation, and then going back. And if you have to make some tweaks, or then you can move on to the next thing. That probably seems like a better idea than like doing the whole hog all at once, or the whole tofurkey for Andrew. Um, but and that's
Yeah,
something that even in the course that you Sherlock that I did was my suggestion as well, but via feed me, which is just do a pass, verify, and then make sure that everything is working properly.
yeah, and you
Um,
could, maybe even just start by importing a single entry from a single post type or
mhm.
whatever, and just seeing if that works. And rather than waiting around, if you have a large WordPress site and you don't want to wait 15 minutes between each
Right.
test, take advantage of that item ID option or the limit option, or per page option, I should say.
As
We've
as
got
people use this and come across scenarios where it doesn't support a certain field type or a use case, what's the best way for them to communicate that to the team, to see if it's something that y'all can add?
With GitHub issue
Okay.
would be the
On the
best
WP
would be
import
the best
project?
option. Yep, yep, we're monitoring that, and there's you can reach us in multiple ways, but that would be the best
Okay.
for posterity.
we got two questions from Eric Poehler. First one is, what about non-Gutenberg WordPress sites that use a classic editor? Do you
Mhm.
import the rendered HTML? He said he's thinking of those weird short codes
Oh,
and
yeah, the
that type of thing.
shortcode. Yeah.
So we don't have any current support for parsing shortcodes, but we probably should add that. I'm guessing there's a way we could access the shortcode, like how they should resolve through the API, at least through our plugin. It's not currently supported, but again, put a GitHub issue out there, and we can get to it for sure.
Believe it or
As
not,
far
I
as like
might
how,
actually have a WordPress site that has short codes that I could give you access to.
go for it, yeah. Um, as far as like just generally, how does the importer work with Classic Editor? It's fine. It just comes back as a big blob of HTML that we stick in CK Editor.
And this is a question again from Eric Poehler that he mentioned in the beginning of the chat. Said, is it possible that one fine day Pixel and Tonic will go all photo mat on its community? Why is it okay that Craft integrates plugin functionality into its core? I asked myself these questions recently. I want to caveat this, that this is not technically in core, right? This WP import is a separate extension, right, to import stuff. And I'm going to inject my own opinions here that if you make a content management system, being able to get data in and out of that content management system is a very fundamental feature of a CMS. So I would not have any problem with that being in core, whether plugins exist that do it or not. Anyway, go ahead, Brandon.
I assume that the question is based on specifically like how Automatic has completely taken
Yeah.
over the free version of Advanced Custom Fields.
Yep.
So I wish it would just go without saying that we would never do anything quite like that, but it's 2024 and there's no rules anymore. So no, we wouldn't ever. There's been one time where we've wanted to take over an existing plugin that was kind of abandonware, specifically because we wanted its handle, and I want to say that was for Shopify. And so we reached out to the plugin developer and asked, hey, can we just like take this off your hands? You seem to be done with it. It was a free plugin. It wasn't like they were making any money with it. They responded back saying, sure. And so we did. And we kind of like released whatever, version we were working on as like the next major version, and made sure that there was some documentation and some sort of like migration path for the handful of people that were on the older version. But had he said no, we would have just fine, like we'll come up with a custom handle and deal with it.
He's
There's
worried if you have a midlife crisis, you get drunk with
Yeah,
power, and
yeah. So so we have internally started talking about potentially updating our terms to clarify um, that we would just never do that. That, you know, if it's your listing in the plugin store, that it's yours unless you give permission to release it to someone else, including us. Wouldn't be the first time we've updated our terms in response to um, in response to automatic. In fact, the last time we updated our terms, it was to specifically clarify that we will never scrape your site for AI training data, because it came out that Automatic was doing that even for sites that weren't hosted by them, just through Jetpack, I guess. So just to make it abundantly clear, like, this is your content, you own it. We don't have any right to it. Even if you're hosting on Craft Cloud, it's yours. We won't touch it. We won't use it.
So first of all, I believe that you would never do that. But the caveat that I would say about terms and conditions is, in every company's terms and conditions is where they say we can change the terms and conditions whenever we want, right?
Sure.
But,
And so like, ultimately, yeah, like, there's nothing I can say that would like make you 100% certain.
Right.
The other thing that I've brought up when this has come up in the past couple weeks, is we don't have, like, part of the reason that it was successful for them is that they have built-in auto updating in WordPress, right? And it's on by default. So by default, if no one had changed that setting, everybody who had advanced custom fields one day had Automatic's, you know, bastardization version, secure custom fields the next day, because they have that automatic update mechanism. Craft does not, will not, cannot have anything like that. We won't, because it's a security vulnerability. It introduces massive supply chain attack potential.
Unreal. Yeah.
And we can't, because it goes against the way Craft works with, you know, like, updates happen locally. Any admin changes have to happen locally, and once you're on production, that's, you know, everything that's in composer.json and composer.lock is set in stone, and we're not going to touch it without being deployed. So down the road, if Craft Cloud introduced some, you know, more SaaS version of Craft, and, you know, it was more hands off, like, theoretically we'd add something like that there. But, you know, we'd have to go through a lot of security, you know, researcher approval to get that. So figure out the right way to
Aaron
do it.
Bushnell has got a question for you. Does the importer import uploads that are referenced in the body of a blog post? In other words, if you had a link in a rich text field to a PDF, does it then parse that and bring it in?
If the block type stores the reference, I'm pretty sure. I mean, it'd be the same thing as how we're doing with that image example. So it's been like the Gutenberg stuff was the first thing I worked on, so it's been a little while, and I can't remember, but I'm pretty sure there was a block type I dealt with that was like a relationship that pulls in the related entry, but I can't quite remember. Maybe that's not true.
But what if it's just like an
though.
inline link to the asset?
Yeah, I mean, if they like just typed it themselves and it wasn't directly related by the Gutenberg block, then I don't think we'd have any way to do that. No, but
Gotcha.
In the case of image blocks, they do actually store the image ID that that you're linking to within the metadata for the block, and so we're able to recreate that relationship. And I'm sure there's, like, if there is a relationship block type as well, we could do the same thing there.
And we got a question from Vinali. Why did Pixel and Tonic decide to implement it via a new CLI tool as opposed to with FeedMe?
It's just such a highly tailored tool for WordPress. It wouldn't have made sense to add this as functionality to FeedMe. FeedMe is built all around, like, importing one thing at a time with each feed. So this specific, you know, feed for entries, and this other feed for assets, and this other feed for users and whatnot. And we really wanted this to be a one command tool that just does everything for you.
Yep.
Including creating those sections and those custom fields, which is way outside of the scope of FeedMe.
Is there a future where FeedMe is redone where you could have like a WordPress package that you could install and use with FeedMe like as like import tools, or is that not really the direction that you're going to go with it?
You could call
It's
it a
just, yeah, it's
jetpack.
not, it's not the direction we want to take FeedMe. FeedMe's really like, we're continuing to maintain it. But it's mostly there to bridge the gap until Craft has built-in native importing,
Yep.
and more powerful exporting as well, which, it's like FeedMe basically makes it a non-urgent priority for us, but it will happen at some point. And until then, FeedMe continues to kind of just be maintained as like this really great importing tool, but that's it.
Oh, Andrew, do we have more questions from the crew in the chat?
Yep, there's one more follow-up from Mort. He says, is there a plan to eventually tackle a WooCommerce to Craft Commerce migration?
We literally started talking about that yesterday morning, right before announcing everything. So it's definitely something we want to do. We are going to wait and see what the demand is for it first, just because it's potentially a large project. But yeah, if we think that there's an opportunity there for people to go from using a free e-commerce platform to a $1,200 e-commerce platform, we think there's demand for that, we will definitely add it. It's definitely possible. So it's just a matter of taking the time and priorities. Both Luke and Nathaniel are already neck deep in their own specific features for Craft Commerce right now. So gotta wait for those to wrap up too.
So what's the WP imports out? Craft 5.5 is out. Let's talk about WP import first. What are you looking at like over the next 6 months, a year leading up to Craft 6 with WP import? What's that roadmap look like for it?
We basically just want to be like really attentive to anyone that's trying to come to Craft with an existing WordPress site, and if it's something that it's currently getting you 80% of the way there and you just need a little bit of help to get it over the hump, we want to be there to continue maintaining it and adding those extra functionalities. Just this morning, someone in Discord mentioned 2 specific ACF field types that are part of the pro package that we haven't added support for yet. And they're like, if you could just get those 2 in, I've got 60 sites that I'm ready to pull into Craft. And it's like, well, okay, that's a no brainer. Like we're gonna, continue to go toward like, 100% advanced custom field coverage and Gutenberg block coverage. So those are the obvious things. Adding support for, again, like, getting the ability for SEOmatic to start importing Yoast content, get Freeform and Formy to start importing Gravity Forms content, and then Commerce to import WooCommerce functionality. Like the goal would be that most WordPress, most basic, WordPress sites that don't have a bunch of custom functionality built in would start to be importable in Craft using this.
That was literally the first question after you gave the demo of the WP import at .1 in Toronto. I think it was Justin asked, hey, what about importing Yoast SEO into SEOmatic?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. Like if we have an example site to work off of, then we can start diving in and seeing how the content is stored and how that would most accurately map to something in SEOmatic, and then figure out the best way to make that happen.
And you have my axe. Anything I can do to help, I'm more than willing to do my thing to happen.
Yeah. It would definitely make sense to have it because SEO content is content too and needs to get pulled in.
Yeah, Yoast is a pretty big deal.
It would be a big concern of a lot of people that are running WordPress sites is, well, we can convert it over to this other thing that I've never heard of, but what happens to my SEO? I just run into that so often.
Just to have that be a check mark, on the features of, yes, your Yoast stuff is supported thanks to SEOmatic would be huge.
Brandon, the work on the knowledge base article for migrating to WordPress, or I guess Craft CMS for WordPress,
Hmm.
people. Then you talked about upcoming starter projects for Nuxt and other frameworks. Seems like there's a big effort on outreach right now. WP Import is just one part of that. Is that something that's continuing forward? Do you have developer relations with Travis now? I know August does a ton of stuff behind the scenes. He seems to, I mean,
Oh,
you know,
August is amazing. He's,
yeah. I think he
he's
single-handedly
constantly,
handles 90% of the inquiries in Discord. Um,
yeah,
but that seems like a
yeah, he's
pretty
great.
big focus right now is the outreach and you know as Craft becomes uh, you know, Craft 5 is such a huge step forward. But is that the case? What y'all been focusing
Yeah,
on?
exactly. I mean, that was like the reason we decided to move forward with hiring a DevRel, which we're super excited to have Travis on board. He's the one that designed the starter, and the WordPress version of that is just a kind of quick pivot from the bulk of the work he's been doing, which is these starters for a variety of front ends. Um, but once we get that out there, moving on to we got a long list of outreach type things we were going to get to that are all on his plate, and we're really excited about the potential that's going to bring.
So Craft 5.5 just came out this week. What's coming up next for Craft for Craft 5 that you can talk about?
Let's see. So Craft 5, the PRs that are in the works right now that are notable are there's one for copying content between sites.
Hmm.
So right now there's not really like if you have two sites and there's a field that's translatable within them, there's not really a good way to get content from one to the other besides just manually copying and pasting. So making that easier to do. Um, there's some stuff we want to do with making sections and entry types and custom fields, uh, make the organization of those things better. So potentially adding like a tag functionality to entry types and fields, and giving you the ability to organize things by tags and sort by tags and filter and whatnot, um, is a big thing on our list. We've got some CK editor updates coming. We're working on a like CK editor 5.0, which will still be for Craft 5, but kind of does some breaking changes in terms of how the GraphQL output works, and kind of improve the UI a little bit there. So there's a bunch of stuff like that. As we move into the new year, our biggest focus is going to be Craft 6. So don't expect as much of a quick pace on new features for Craft 5 going forward, maybe beyond a 5.6 that hopefully comes out early January.
Excellent. Well, just a reminder to everybody, if you haven't already, to read the knowledge base article, Craft CMS for web developers, or if you know a a developer on uh, WordPress right now, if they talk about Craft and they don't know what it is or how it works, you can share this knowledge base article with them. And then when 5.5 on the features there, Andrew and I did a live stream portion last week on 5.5 where we talked about it, and there's a bunch of the features listed out as well on that article. I'll put links with those with the recording of this, and I'll drop those in the chat. And of course, there's links off to WP Import from this knowledge base article. Well, Brandon, thanks for taking the time to come talk about and demo WP Import. Appreciate you
Yeah.
hanging out with us on this.
Thanks for doing the special edition of this.
Yeah,
This was
special
fun.
edition live stream. All right, everybody. Andrew and I are typically live on the first and third Thursday every month. So we'll be back next week. It'll be our third Thursday. And we will see you all then on the live stream. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye,
Bye
everybody.
bye.